Hip Forest University. 2 weeks later, I moved into my new dorm room, a forced triple with 2 other fellas. I wasn't stoked about the lack of personal space, but luckily my roommates were like-minded brothers. It could have been much worse when I considered all the other dudes who lived on that floor. My roommates were Omar and John, 2 guys with power usage tendencies similar to mine. They mostly consumed the green power at the same frequency as me, and had gone through some experiences in the great unknown as well. Maybe they weren't as into the arts as my former peers, but that was fine with me. I needed some diversity of characters in my life, not a bunch of people all taking the same quote-unquote look at my art direction. Anyway, I was excited to meet new people and had warmed up to the fact that I was a year older than the rest of my freshman dorm mates. Perhaps I'd give off that slightly older vibe, and that would make me more attractive, or something. Of course, it didn't end up being so simple. I decided to take it easy with the great unknown that first month. I stuck to green power consumption and weekend drinks as I awaited the right neurological message to compel me to take my next journey. It's hard to remember the specifics of those first few weeks of Hip Forest, what with the newness of everything and the initial feelings of social competition as the friend circles formed. What I do remember is that I grew depressed rather quickly and realized that I had some unshakable cynicism about this first month of freshman socialization. I'd watched the bulk of my Hip City friendships deteriorate with ease, and I got stuck wondering if I could chalk it down to bad luck, or if there was something repulsive about me socially. Of course I didn't deserve anyone, but perhaps I came across as someone who felt they deserved something, and people wanted nothing to do with that. I was the guy who transferred here after freshman year somewhere else, not the furthest thing from a possible social red flag. Maybe no one else thought of it that way, and I was my own worst enemy, but I sure felt like an imposter amongst that Hip Forest class of 2017, and the class of 2016 friend groups were out of my reach for the time being. Since I felt isolated as it was, by the end of September, I deemed myself ready for a DSL chip. DSL usually had a more default euphoric energy for me, and I probably wouldn't slip into a devil delusion. For the experience, I recruited Omar, a DSL first-timer. Since he wasn't the most outwardly social and already had a girlfriend, he became my main green power consumption brother, as well as my main dining hall buddy. Omar was first-generation Austrian-American, a year younger than me, and had a keen interest in biology. He sported black square-rimmed glasses and loved snowboarding as much as he loved beer. He was the ideal companion for great unknown exploration, since he didn't feel the need to talk excessively about every thought that entered his brain. So a Saturday came, and we found ourselves with not much in particular to do, aside from DSL. I'm not sure where I purchased the chips. Perhaps they were left over from a Hip City time, or even part of a stash from the MGMT show the spring before. Regardless, I remember being certain that the DSL was legitimate, so we placed the chips on our tongues. The experience ended up being unique in that there weren't many memorable themes, nor major points of epiphany. Instead, I remember a simple happiness as Omar and I laughed our asses off for the greater part of 4 hours. It felt like everything we said to each other meant something else terribly hilarious. I have no idea what we talked about, but remember I took time to stare at a waviness in the ceiling. A few hours passed until we felt we could handle human interactions, so we decided to go consume some green power outside on a picnic table in the middle of a field between dorms and parking lots. As we puffed away and watched the weekend student traffic, it felt like we had exited time for a moment. There we were, just a couple of pals in our first year at HFU, enjoying the sight of cars coming and going, like they were a cartoon visualizer, as we openly consumed green power without much of a care in the world. Only in this mental state could we be so amused by the sight of college kids in cars. We made up stories about what was going on in their lives. These were college kids managing all kinds of concerns about friends, futures, the weekends, their love lives, and their general successes as modern human beings. There they were, billions of self-centered dramas we would never know the true stories of. They were smart monkeys being transported by fast-moving chunks of metal. They lived in brick boxes and were perfectly domesticated for the American way. It was both laughable and sentimental, this special moment of ours as we sat on the bench and witnessed the filth of commodified education. We returned to the dorm room, and I remember I strongly sensed Omar's spirit animal, as I was prone to believing I could detect at that time in my life. His girlfriend Cassie came over, and I looked at them nested in his bed. How could I have missed it? He was certainly a bird, and a bird of prey, to be more specific. Yes, there he was, a bird nested on his bed with a female counterpart. Of course, they were just humans, but I was aware of their telling physical and mental features, ones perfectly exaggerated in that moment. I relayed my observation, and my words seemed to bear some weight with Omar and Cassie. Our connections to DSL weakened, and though Cassie had been skeptical about Omar's consumption of the DSL, she seemed to find him better for it afterwards. It always felt like some rite of passage, and what better time for one of those than my first fall at Hip Forest. The experience put me in great spirits. It proved I was resilient enough to dwell in the great unknown, despite what had happened only a month or so earlier. Maybe that time with James really was just as simple as wrong place, time, and dosage of penis envies